Hey, good morning. Welcome back to the show. Speaking of the village, I'm your host, Dawn Thompson. And today I'm flying solo without Nicole. She is taking care of a sick little one, unfortunately, in the ER this morning. But Laurel, thank you so much for joining me, anyways, and being able to meet and greet and just learn more about what you do, what kind of cool information we could offer up to our clients and our listeners. If you could, we don't do bios on this show just because we feel like it takes too much time. But if you could just introduce yourself, tell people who you are, a little bit about you, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Laurel Wilson. I've been working with families and healthcare professionals that are focused on perinatal health for about 30 years. And my particular passion and love is helping families and healthcare professionals understand how the microbiome and epigenetics and hormones really contribute to our health. And the beginning of that is how we feed our babies.
Well, I have been so fascinated by the microbiome in general, but especially um, how understanding that when babies pass through the vaginal canal, that their microbiome is being established when that happens, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the beginning of that process, and like how, like you were saying before we started recording about how we have microbiome in our breasts, microbiome in our vaginas, and there's so many things that are happening that affects not just our gut, but also just like our ability to process things. And I'm stumbling like crazy. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, our microbiome is really incredible. And now we are recognizing that the human body is really what we like to refer to as a hollow biome, which is a kind of a crazy term, but essentially to give you an idea to think about it, we are more microbiome genetics than we are human genetics in the human body. And so researchers used to say they thought it was about 90% of microbiome genetics to 10% human. Now we think it's more like 60-40.
Okay.
So, but still, that is a significant and a majority amount of the genetic information that is keeping our bodies rolling has to do with our microbiome and not our human DNA. And so it's really important that we foster healthy microbes throughout our entire life. And as you mentioned, we have a microbiome all over our entire body. It's external, it's internal, it's in every single organ. And one of the most critical places that our microbiome exists is in our gut. And so when a baby is being born, it's what we call their seeding exposure. It's their very first exposure to these microbes that will colonize them both externally and internally and really set up the health of their gut. So we really ideally would like that seeding process to be healthy to get them off to the best start. And if they can't, so the healthiest start, right, is if they are born vaginally, so they can pick up all of that vaginal bacteria. And then as they come through the perineum, they're picking up some bad microbes, essentially, which cause some of their healthy microbes to overpopulate. And then they're placed skin to skin. So then they start to pick up all the microbes of their family. And then the next major stage of feeding is their first food. And ideally, that's going to be human milk.
I think I had a someone on my board for improving birth, whatever, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And she was actually doing research on the microbiome, the vaginal microbiome and stuff. And like it was fascinating to me. And this was fairly all new kind of information that's been coming out. And, I there's all this, discussion about fed is best. And of course, fed is best. And I had mentioned to you about how recently seen a post, and it was basically like women will have enough milk. It's all kind of baloney, blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, man, for the women who actually experience that, that's got to be really tough to hear because what my point was is that that's true when women have a normal physiological birth. But in most cases at this point, that's not what's happening. And many women wind up suffering from either a cesarean, which impacts the milk production or can impact the milk
And
production, right? Or the fact that they're severely engorged because they had so many IV fluids on board that it
mhm.
makes it difficult for the baby to latch properly and be able to pull out enough milk to then stimulate, it's like there's so many things. And that's just like the surface stuff. And what you're talking about is the whole micro piece of the things that we're just now starting to understand. And I think that I think that the thing that I just keep feeling like is we are just messing with mother nature in such a massive way, and to reduce these really fine small risks, right? But we're actually not improving any of them. We're actually making them worse. And I think your argument or the information that you have about microbiome really can make a difference. So what do you think from someone who's pregnant with their first baby right now? What's the thing about this that you want them to understand?
Well, I think the most critical piece for them is to really understand that their milk, the very first gift that their milk gives to their baby, is it is setting their baby's immune system up for health and their baby's gut system up for health. And that is something that cannot be done with the milk or artificial formula, with the milk from another species or from artificial formula. And that's because each individual human it's like we're custom creating our own micro brew that is unique to our babies. And so that is the ideal first thing that a baby would get, because the first thing that human milk does is we don't even like to think of colostrum really as nutrition first, because it's not nutrition first. It's immune factors first. It is setting up the gut by providing both the microbes that will instill themselves and create these colonies within the baby's gut that can last a lifetime. But then it's also providing the food for those microbes to thrive and survive. And so as soon as they get set up, then they start to work within that baby's gut system to set up a mucosal layer lining the gut, which protects the gut for the rest of the life of that baby's life against large proteins, against bacteria, against certain pathogens, against allergens from accessing that baby's bloodstream through the gut system. So it creates it's not really a seal because it allows micronutrients to get through, but what it does is prevent macronutrients from getting through. And this colonization really it's occurring in the first few days after birth. And so when you start to colonize a baby's gut system with bacteria that is designed for another mammal, or if you think about not even putting in the healthy bacteria that is designed to protect that baby's gut, you're setting that child's health up for a different trajectory. And so I want parents to know that if they do have some challenges with feeding their baby, with breast or chest feeding their child at the beginning, the best thing to do is to get support. Connect with a lactation consultant, call the Leche League, contact the Breastfeeding Cafe, get some help, because there are things that we can do to help support. And if that parent can't provide all the milk that baby needs, there are also other options, other pathways to provide that baby human milk instead of artificial milk, if that's the parental choice.
Yeah. So I have a question, because I'm immediately thinking of two things, because
Mhm.
I'm all about birth, right? That's where my brain is. So I'm thinking, okay, so what happens if someone just had a cesarean but they are going to breastfeed
Mhm.
or like plan to breastfeed? So
Yeah.
if the baby's not getting that initial microbiome coming through the vaginal canal, what happens then?
So there's a few options. Okay. If we know that it's going to be a cesarean delivery, there is something that is called vaginal seeding that can be done in some facilities. And essentially what that is they place gauze inside the vaginal canal, and then they will use that gauze to basically sweep over the baby's external skin. And sometimes they will put it in the baby's nose and in the baby's mouth to colonize the baby with the vaginal microbiome. Now, I will tell you, ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, are not pro seeding, external seeding. And the reason for that is because there are some people who have pathogenic bacteria in their vaginal canal. And so there has not been a lot of research around seeding and its optimal safety. That being said, what we are seeing at a lot of baby friendly facilities is that they have been practicing vaginal seeding with with very little negative commentary. And it seems to be a great alternative or option in the event of a cesarean birth. Now, here's one of the interesting things, Dawn, though, is where we are seeing a lot of research that is absolutely positive is in what we call fecal sampling, which is where they actually take the stool of the pregnant parent of the mom and they provide that stool, basically poop pills, to those newborns who have been born via cesarean section. And they found that that type of treatment actually provides the very specific type of bacteria that is required for gut health for those babies. And it works. It instills the bacteria into the baby's gut and allows it to prosper. Whereas when you do that external seeding through like the sponging, it doesn't seem to last as long if exclusive breastfeeding doesn't also happen. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in that world.
Well, and then the other thing that makes me question that is like, and maybe there's no solid research on this yet, but what comes to my mind is if it's a scheduled cesarean versus a cesarean that's happening mid-labor, does that make a difference? Because in my mind, what we know about, say, hormone in general is that many of those don't start happening and producing unless natural labor has started. So if labor hasn't started, is that one of the things that just starts developing, as the labor is happening, not that it's there all the time?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily have an answer to that. But we do know that the microbiome for babies who are born vaginally, babies who are born emergency cesarean, and babies that are born planned cesarean have very unique microbiomes. And interestingly, the babies that are born planned cesarean section have microbiomes that are more similar to vaginal birth than babies that are born emergently. And we think that has to do with the amount of catecholamines, adrenaline, and stress hormones that wind up flooding the body during an emergency process. So, I mean, in all cases, it's very important for a baby to receive human milk. But what we do see is that in the case of an emergency cesarean, that may be the most critical time to help a child's microbiome to kind of regulate itself.
Yeah. What is the difference? So like if someone just is only able to breastfeed or give colostrum for the first few days and they're just really struggling with milk production or latch or tongue ties or, all these other things. But can we talk about the benefits of even just starting, even if you have just a few days worth or able?
Yeah. So, I mean, the benefits of just starting is that the very first bacteria that have an opportunity to get in there and start to colonize are going to be human bacteria, and they're going to be healthy bacteria. You're going to see a lot of lactobacillus starting to take up residence, even if there is a plan for a few days down the road, or if there is an intervention requiring artificial milk a few days down the road, at least you have that healthy bacteria getting in there and starting the colonization process right away. And so there's more opportunity for them to crowd out the pathogenic bacteria that will be introduced through infant formula. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Once you introduce artificial milk into a baby's system, we start to see a significant rise in pathogenic bacteria in that child's gut. That's why we start to see the poop smells different, the poop looks different. And so we thought, oh, it's just digestion. It's just changing digestion. Well, yeah, it is. Because what's happening is the bacteria are promoting cow and in what manner that baby digests food. But the other thing that I think is something that a lot of parents haven't fully been educated on yet is that the microbiome for that baby is not just about how we digest food. Microbes are also communicating through the baby's vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the entire body, and it is sending messages from the baby's gut to the baby's brain. And it is also helping to regulate our mental health from the time we're babies for the rest of our lives. And so our microbes are also part of our mental health processes. And the other thing is that these microbes are also responsible for manufacturing a significant amount of our hormones throughout our life. And that's something that we often aren't fully embracing and fully understanding how impactful those bacteria are in terms of all forms, in terms of our anxiety and stress levels, our metabolism, our immunity, but also things such as like how we feel attracted to other human beings, because those microbes create pheromones and help us feel attracted to other people, right? So it's just this whole conglomerate of importance. So even if you only get 1 day of colostrum, you've instilled in that baby's body an enormous, literally millions of bacteria into that baby's body that they will need for the rest of their life. That was a long answer to your question.
No, I love it. I appreciate it. And here's the thing I'm wondering about because, I had said to you earlier, my whole generation, our
Mhm.
whole generation, right? I mean, the majority of people that were born around in the 70s,
Mhm.
particularly, most of them were told that breastfeeding was disgusting,
Yep.
that it was, like the last thing you should do, that that formula was far better, far superior, all these things. And so I know I was never breastfed. I only had formula. And I just can't help but wonder about obesity because I have struggled with my weight my entire life. And it doesn't seem to matter what I do, and so that you saying that, and I know that they've connected that already, that that babies born by cesarean are 50% more likely to have obesity and asthma and a bunch of other things. And at this point, in this conversation, it's making me think, is that more about the microbiome than the actual process of or the lack of microbiome, you
Yeah.
know? And then you add kids who aren't breastfed, you know?
So there are layers, right? There's layers of the contributing factors, but we know that human milk, as considering sort of like a organ donation and considering it as a bacterial donation into that baby's gut system, it absolutely does impact our metabolism because we have specific bacteria found in human milk that regulate leptin levels, ghrelin levels. So these are hormones that cause us to feel hungry and feel satiated. So when we mess with that, it does change how we relate to food for the rest of our lives. Those bacteria are releasing, ghrelin and leptin, which are communicating to our brain when we're hungry, what type of foods we want to eat, how we experience cravings when we eat, all of these things. The other thing that these bacteria do is they help to regulate our insulin levels and our insulin sensitivity. And when we start to hit age 40 and 50, we may not notice these things as significantly when we're in our younger lives. But as we start to hit our 40s and 50s, particularly for women, as we reach the stages of perimenopause and menopause, our insulin levels matter significantly. And if we don't have a microbiome that's in there to support these changes, we are at risk for things like prediabetes. And then, diabetes, we are at risk for developing insulin resistance. And, it's such a it's a lifelong consideration when you think about what food goes into your baby initially. It's not just considering the health of your baby right then, it's considering the health of that future adult.
Well, and I want to address though something that, and I think I kind of touched on it in the beginning. The thing I don't want to do though is like make people feel guilty about not
Right.
being able to produce enough milk or whatever, because those things happen. And I want people to understand that when we go through the normal physiological process, we typically aren't going to have any issues.
Mhm.
But the healthcare system is so epically intervening in the normal physiological process of birth that it's not uncommon for women to struggle with production and things of that nature in the beginning. So I don't want anybody to like, if someone's over here going, I really wanted to breastfeed, it was the thing that was, like, I don't want people to walk away from this episode feeling shame and, whatever else. But there are so many women out there right now that are literally just trying to decide if they're going to breastfeed or formula feed. You know what I mean? Like, not because they can't or not because they just are like, I don't know if I want to have something breastfeeding and sucking. It's like a lot of it is vanity. A lot of it is, there's so many other reasons that play into it. And I think that people don't understand the gravity
Right.
of that decision-making process.
I feel too like we also don't give enough information about the alternatives. When you look at the World Health Organization's kind of when you look at their scale of how to feed a baby, like the first best health choice is milk from their own parent, the baby's own parent. The next choice would be expressed milk from like breastfeeding. The next choice would be expressed milk from their parent. The next best option is expressed milk from another parent, not infant formula. But here in the United States, we go directly from, oh, if you're not going to breastfeed your child, infant formula is your next best option. But the reality is there is a whole network out there in the United States and all over the world that can help connect families with parents who are willing to donate. It gives them a whole system of how to screen families, how to create the most optimal safety. And then there's also human milk donor banks that we have access to. And then, yes, infant formula. So there's a wide variety of options for families that we don't talk about very often. And I think it should be part of the conversation because for the longest time, the idea of feeding a baby milk that comes from another mammal, that was like, oh, that's normal. But milk that comes from another human being was seen as strange. And in fact, it is a very viable, very, very safe option,
Yeah.
particularly for
Well,
healthy babies.
and I think about Nicole because I know she would mention this right now if she was sitting here with us, but she struggled with milk production and has, with all four of her kids, has had to go get donor milk. But she has still breastfed,
Mm-hmm.
but then included donor milk,
Right,
through
right,
the process. So like it wasn't an either or. She was able to do both.
right.
And I think that, that's an option. And like what you're saying is there's not a lot. We need to put, I'm going to have Nicole put in the show notes about a milk bank that, I know there's a national milk bank. And then there's also groups. Facebook is a great place.
Yeah,
I
there's
mean, those ones are not tested. There are other facilities that cost more and all of that. But I mean, a lot of the times, like I know Nicole was just connecting with local moms that in her community that then she would just go and pick up, a bunch of breast milk, right?
right. Yeah. So there's Human Milk for Human Babies, which is an international organization that can connect families who are willing to either share milk or need to receive milk. There's also Eats on Feets, which is another organization that's a play on Meals on Wheels to connect families. And Eats on Feets actually created this amazing system, which is called the 4 Pillars of Safe Milk Sharing. So if you are going to be using milk within the community as opposed to milk from a donor human milk bank, which is pasteurized and goes through a whole screening process. There is a way through these 4 pillars to create the safest milk possible through sharing within your community. So there are ways to make it very, very safe and accessible for everyday parents. And there are so many families that are willing to donate. There really are so many families who are willing to donate milk.
I mean, I would have. I had so much milk.
You hear that a lot too, like parents. Well, and particularly in these days where like things like Hakas or the silicone tools are being introduced to families and they're starting to use them earlier and earlier on, which is creating for many families actually hyperlactation. And so they wind up with this enormous milk supply. There's the families on this side that are struggling to make milk. And then there's the families on this side that are dealing with too much milk. It causes a whole host of challenges as well. But they are more than willing to donate milk as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, same. My problem was I couldn't pump. Did not matter. Like, it's so weird because with my first two kids, well, my second kid in particular, I had to go right back to work. 6 weeks and I was back at work. And I was trying to exclusively breastfeed, but I very quickly was not producing enough for him as he was growing and it was just no way. So I was doing both breast milk and formula. But I continued to pump for 9 months, like no issues. But when I had my last two kiddos, I was not able to pump. I would sit there forever and I'd try and looking at photos. I'm trying to hold my baby. Like I've got the industrial pump from the hospital. Like I tried everything and I would literally get like drops. It's like, what is that about? But then I had a kid who didn't have a shut off switch and she would just eat and eat and eat and eat. And then she would vomit everything everywhere. It was like for the first few weeks, I had to figure out like, no, I need to time her.
Lactation.
Like she will not stop eating and she'll just eat so much milk that as soon as you move her, she's just throwing everything up. So, but I mean, it was an enormous amount of milk, but I could not get it out.
Yeah. I mean, there's so I really wish that you had access to one of these amazing expression professionals that we have today because we're learning so many new things. Like we used to say always size up for breast shields if you're having challenges with removing milk, and now we say try sizing down first.
Yeah.
But you know what's so interesting, Don, is that around the world, we're we are one of the only countries that is so reliant on expression devices to go back to work. Most places around the world, nobody takes a pump. They hand express. Like what you find in the drugstore is not pumps. You find bowls that fit around your breast so that you can express because it is so efficient for so many women. And we're just not taught that skill here. We're not taught that skill. And I mean, I volunteered in Greece as a lactation consultant for the refugees, and we had a young mother who had had a baby in the NICU until we were trying to find her a pump, trying to find her an expression device. And we had to go to all of these different pharmacies to find a pump, and no one had one. We had to special order one because they're like, well, isn't she just hand expressing? Well, it was such a unique perspective. Like we just do things differently in the United States.
I mean, with everything, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I had somebody who was talking about breastfeeding for long periods of time yesterday and how she's like, it was just so weird. She's breastfeeding her 4-year-old. And I was like, I am the wrong person to have that conversation with because I don't think it's weird. I breastfed my youngest till he was 3.5, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also an interesting thing to just say, like, we're one of the only countries who doesn't think that doesn't breastfeed for long periods of time for
Right.
four
Yeah.
years. But like everyone here thinks it's so bizarre if you're breastfeeding a toddler or whatever, like
Right. Well,
it's
and I think and it's not true that we're the only westernized country, but in the United States, we do have significant amount of sexualizing the breasts and seeing them as primarily sexual objects. So once a child becomes verbal, there's this, sometimes this subconscious feeling of, it may contribute to some like other people may view it as a sexual behavior, which it's absolutely not. It's a normal behavior. It's a healthy behavior. It's a human behavior. But certainly our cultural mores really do play into how we feel about feeding our children. Just like, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't seem weird to feed our children milk from another animal, but it does seem weird to feed our children milk from another human being. Like that is a cultural thing in the United States. It's a cultural thing. Whereas in many other cultures, cross nursing, like friends who nurse one another's babies, or that's not seen as strange at all.
so it's interesting because I mean, in my life, I would have before becoming a doula and before getting into birth work and advocacy and all of that, I would have definitely been that person who thought it was weird. I would have thought like, oh my God, nurse someone else's baby or like like have someone else. I'd like that's just weird. I
Mhm.
know that I would have been that person. But now, 23 years into this work, I'm like, that'd be amazing. I would, I would love to do that with a girlfriend if necessary, if she needed it. Like, if you need it, I'm coming over. I can do it, or vice versa. Or like, I'm sick. Whatever it is. Like, I just think it's such a beautiful thing. And really understanding history and all of those things that it's entirely possible and it's totally fine. And it's still far better than giving anything that is formulated in a factory.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Just, I want to make sure that parents feel empowered to ask the questions they need to decide what is best for their family. And that means understanding all their options. It's not just two options. It's not just, I'm gonna, I'm gonna feed my baby with my own body and only that, or I'm gonna have infant formula. There's a wide range of options, including both breastfeeding and infant formula feeding, which is what we find the majority of families are doing in the United States, because we do have data now that shows a significant number of families transition back to work by 2 weeks postpartum. 2 weeks. Now, even getting your milk established within 2 weeks is a challenge. So, we do know that many of them are reliant on infant formula to make that transition and ensure that their child can be fed. So we do also have to look at the reality of what most families are dealing with here in the United States.
No question. It's like that's the thing I never want people to walk away from is feeling shame around whatever
Mm-mm.
what they had to do.
Right.
It's like sometimes it's just a lack of information, it's a lack of support, it's a lack of timing. There's so many things that can go into this process of breastfeeding that I never want anyone to feel shame. But I can tell you that, I personally struggled with breastfeeding. I think I fed my first baby for the first 3 months, and then my second baby I pumped for 9 months because I had to go right back to work.
Mm-hmm.
My third baby, again, I barely did it because what happened was I wound up getting pregnant so quickly. I was 4 months postpartum when I found out I was already 9 weeks pregnant. And my midwife asked me, "How's your milk supply?" And I was like, "Oh, it seems fine." I didn't know. I wasn't pumping. I was just breastfeeding her, and she was breastfeeding on a normal schedule and all of that. Only to find out that she'd been becoming really fussy, increasingly fussy. And I thought she was teething or something. And then one day I was changing her diaper and I realized her little fat pad, like just below her belly button, was like wrinkly. Like she had lost weight rapidly. And I was like, all of a sudden I had this aha moment and I was like, oh my God, I have been starving my baby for like 6 weeks. And I literally ran down and I just made a formula bottle. She's never had formula. This just felt like an urgent, like I suddenly was like
Yeah.
in this panic of urgency. And I made her a bottle and she just downed it
Mhm.
in like that. And I was like, I was absolutely devastated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that is what we all, we can be so grateful that we do have safe infant formula here. We have infant formulas that can meet a variety of needs for babies that are sick or have certain, physical challenges or processes going on in their body. So we can be very grateful that we do have that access here in the United States. Like when we're having these challenges, thank goodness we do have option like that. The key is just making sure that families know all their options and
Yeah.
have access to as much as we can possibly provide them. But it is such an interesting thing because once you become pregnant, if you are in the process of lactating, hormonally, your milk will transition closer back to a colostral state. So while it's still absolutely safe to breastfeed a baby, they may not get the calories they need unless you are breastfeeding them around the clock, essentially,
Right.
but it's still very, very safe. But it's just like, yeah, if you don't know.
The point I was trying to make there though is that by my fourth
Yeah.
baby, I wound up nursing him for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And, the longest breastfeeding relationship, he's by far my healthiest kid.
Hmm.
Like he's all the things, right?
Yeah.
And, but I mean, the point I was trying to make though is that it was different with every child, and I got better at it with every kid, right? And like, and circumstances were what they were, and that
Right.
interfered with that process. And he was finally the first birth, finally, that I didn't have some crazy thing happening, that was
Yeah.
impacting my milk supply, impacting my ability to keep breastfeeding. And really, I didn't, even as a doula with my third child, I was now well into the birth world and all those things. I still didn't think to get donor milk.
Yeah.
And I think, she's also 16,
Hmm.
and maybe I just feel like it wasn't that prominent as it is right now. There weren't these milk banks and all that stuff. It was more of a community thing.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't have the capacity. I was struggling, right? I don't even think I had the capacity to try and go find donor milk.
Right.
And so I think the other thing I would like to express to people is, have a little bit of a plan before your baby comes. Take a class on breastfeeding.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do recommend now. People think it's kind of odd to go to a La Leche League meeting or a breastfeeding cafe when they're still pregnant, but no, that's the best time
This
because
time.
that's when you start to get normalized to the process and the challenges that are associated with feeding your baby. And the other thing too is you develop that community and you develop people, relationships that you can call on in your time of need. So we always say, don't wait till you need it. Show up during
Totally.
pregnancy, meet your leaders, meet the people in the group. That's the best time to go. And I love that you called out that each pregnancy and each baby and each lactation experience is so unique because it is. You may have had an amazing, brilliant 4-year lactation experience, and with your next baby, you struggle to make milk. Like our bodies change, our circumstances change. Every single baby is unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't want someone to go, what I say that because how many people struggle with their first baby,
Hmm.
especially because it's your first baby, not very little experience and all that stuff. And so then they just go into the next one and they're just like, I'm not even gonna bother this time,
Yeah.
and it's like, that's like those first few days are so critically important. Like you said, millions of microbiome, like even if you're expressing and giving it to your baby, like, I don't
Hmm.
know, like do the thing, do whatever you need to do to get that critical liquid gold to your baby.
Yeah. And the other piece is even if you are formula feeding, if you're bottle feeding, like there are still really important pieces of microbiome. Still do skin to skin while you're doing that. Share your external microbiome with your baby. Make eye contact with your baby while you're feeding your baby. It changes your baby's hormonal expression when you're doing that. Like, so there are still things that we can do to optimize our baby's health, whether we're human milk feeding or infant formula feeding, the things we need to teach families. Like, this is optimal. And then if this has to happen, these are the things we can do to optimize that situation, make this the best situation we possibly can make it. So, yeah, I love it when
A
families.
little bit about the microbiome that exists in the breast though, and like
Mhm.
how that impacts babies.
Yeah, so this is it. This is an emerging field and such a brand new field. But what we are finding is that each breast has its own unique microbiome. And depending on the mammary health, which we believe may be related to our overall gut microbiome health, that can change our risk for things like having, we used to call it a plug duct, and it's no longer called a plug duct. We now call it, actually, I can't even think of the term right now. My brain is, but essentially, it is when we get a biofilm that starts to grow within a ductal system, and it prevents milk from flowing quite as freely as it did before. We used to think it was like a buildup of fat, and then we called it a plug. But now we know it's a biofilm. Okay, so bacteria. And so now that we're learning about this microbiome, we know we should treat things very differently. So, you know, um, the other thing that we recognize too is that dependent on your microbiome in your mammary gland, you may be more or less likely to develop mastitis. So, and again, these are just things we're just starting to recognize and realize. So we don't know a whole lot about it. We're just starting to discover it. And so we do anticipate probably in the next 5 years that will completely change probably how we address things like mastitis based on, and it might have to do a lot with our oral health or the foods that we eat while we're pregnant and nursing our babies.
Yeah,
So
I'm so fascinated by
it's
that.
a really interesting and fascinating world, the whole microbiome.
Yeah, I'm interested because I have a client right now that I'm working with postpartum that has had a clogged duct twice already, and her baby's only like 5 weeks old right now. And we've prevented, she started getting a fever and, all those things. And thankfully, we avoided antibiotics because that's usually the thing they go to. And she was using oils and she used a like vibration thing to try and help break it up and massage and heat and all those things. I'd love to hear if you have thoughts about.
So, so the latest, there's some controversy around it. The latest Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine statement came out relatively recently, like about a year and some odd months ago, which kind of changed the way we looked at the mammary gland and the microbiome. And what we used to say were exactly things like that: breast massage, vibration, heat, empty the breast. And the new recommendation completely turned that on its head. They said that you should do breast resting. So you just feed the baby, like you don't try and empty the breast. You just feed the baby when the baby needs to feed. You use ice instead of heat. And the reason for that was because of inflammation. They wanted to reduce the amount of inflammation. Heat brings more blood flow, which can potentially increase inflammation. The same with vibrating tools can increase the risk of inflammation to the breast. And then in terms of massage, like a particularly very gentle massage or massage that is going to move the lymph fluid back into the system, are still good things to do. But what a lot of parents interpret breast massages as grinding in, doing deep massage, and that causes inflammation and really rebounds the issue of the problem that we're having. The other thing that we were seeing a lot of families doing was putting like those silicone tools on and trying to like remove the clog. But because we now know that it's likely not a clog, that instead it is a compilation of a biofilm. If you remove that, you're literally creating a wound inside the duct because you're pulling off this biofilm, and that leaves a wound inside the duct. So it's not, and of course it feels good because you're going to get a release of pressure. That feels good. But instead, what you want to do is focus on reducing inflammation. So anti-inflammatory diet, very not generous use of NSAIDs, but just if you need to use NSAIDs like ibuprofen to manage the pain, you use that as minimally as possible. Or not necessarily ice, but cold packs, not ice, but cold packs, and letting the breast have some rest. I'm not opposed to using warmth, but you only want to use warmth for a few minutes at a time to help with milk flow. You don't want to use warmth for a long period of time because then you can get that increased blood flow and the
And what
inflammation.
do you think about the Haka thing?
Not a fan. Yeah. Not a fan of it. Not a fan of it. As a collection device, I think it's great. Like if you need to use it as a collection device, I think it's great. But to use it in terms of that to pull out a plug, you
Oh
don't
yeah, no,
want
she's
to
just
do that.
using, I'm just wondering if the Haka is causing the problem.
Well, so here's what we know about Hakas. What a lot of parents are doing now is they put a baby on one side and they attach a Haka on the other so they can catch their milk. But what they're doing is they're telling their body they're feeding two babies at once. And this can lead over time to hyperlactation, which can increase your risk of having an inflammatory process because you're making too much milk and it's not getting removed. And it also increases potentially your risk of mastitis.
Well, she's using it right now because she's leaking so badly when she's breastfeeding the other baby. And so she's trying to do it as a catch so she's not losing the milk. But
Yeah. So if she's just holding it, that's okay. But if you're actually using it with the suction on, you're encouraging flow, right? Yeah. So there are some passive collection devices out there that might be a better fit than a Haka if she's wanting to collect the milk, not lose the milk into a pack that don't use suction. So she may want to look at some of those devices instead. Yeah.
yeah, I might need to do that for her. But I'm just realizing like maybe that's more related to why she's gotten the clogged ducts a couple times.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
no, for sure.
there are a lot of things that we've done for a long time now that we have better information, we're going, maybe that wasn't the best use of the tool that we had. I mean, I was guilty of it years ago when hydrogels came on the market. We thought they were like the greatest thing since sliced toast. Like, it gave them to everybody. We literally gave them to everyone in the hospital. And what we found was that we saw an increased risk of bacterial infection. So we have to really be conservative when we are using tools when it comes to lactation. Ideally, we want to use the baby, our voice, our hands, our bodies, and our babies, and like try and keep it at that unless there's a specific need for a tool.
Yeah, great. It's great. Well, I mean, already this has been amazing conversation. I mean, I hope
So
that
great.
people are going to walk away from today's episode thinking, huh, and really just considering their options when it comes to breastfeeding their babies and understanding how critically important it is. And I think like you're saying, we're just scratching the surface on how important it is and how much it impacts the rest of our lives. And it should not be a decision that's taken lightly, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be here with your audience. Thank you for your time today. It's been
You're
an honor.
welcome. And we'll have more information on you and what you do. You can always share if you've got stuff that you can share with us. We'll put it in the show notes or that our listeners would love to participate in. We will do that. But I do need to ask you, Laurel, at the end of every episode, we ask all of our folks, besides what you do, what do you think is a critically important person in a new parent's village?
So for brand new parents, someone that I love to include in their circle is a postpartum doula. I mean, if they have access in their community, I love it because parents need as much support as they possibly can get. And we have so many families these days who are isolated from their parents, from grandparents, from sisters and friends. We are a very mobile society now, and it leaves a lot of families feeling isolated. So I am all for the postpartum doula to help those families get
Oh,
through
yeah.
those first few weeks and days.
Yeah, I am 1,000,000%. Obviously, speaking of the village is
Mhm.
exactly why we started it, why we called it that. The reality is that we are not meant to be in silos. We're not meant to be in our houses by ourselves with just our partner, who, by the way, is not wired whatsoever to do any of this. Right, but we expect them to suddenly be all the things, which I think isn't fair either. And then we are pissed off and angry at our partners because they don't know how to do this. And it's because none of us do, but people who've been through it do. And also, that whole thing about like, our parents, our grandparents, the previous generations used to have many siblings. The average was many siblings, and now our average is 2.5 kids or something, so even our families don't have that depth of knowledge that got passed down from generation to generation. It is just that depth of knowledge has gotten smaller and smaller. And where doula, I mean, I've supported over 300 families. I have so much knowledge and so much
Mhm.
depth, and I can make things so much easier,
Yeah.
for people. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's
Yeah.
anyways. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
I appreciate you. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And we look forward to maybe having you again.
Great. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks so much.
And thank you all for listening. Please check out next week's show. I'm not even sure what it is. I'm not sure where we are in the process, but we can't thank you enough for just listening and participating. Please consider sharing this episode with someone that you love who's about to have a baby. Have a great day.